Welcome to the third episode of B.Y.O.B. Conversations with Berneta and Lornett, as we discuss Eve and the Faders from the Faders and Alpha series. The book is available in all bookstores nationwide and across the globe, and you can also get it from the great Satan, Amazon themselves. So check out Eve and the Faders and get it today. Get it. So we compiled a list of book club discussion questions that you can get on BernetaHaynes.com.
And that's BernetaHaynes.com.
And today, the question we'll be discussing is the rundown motel in Iowa immediately reminds Eve of her childhood poverty. How are themes of poverty and race addressed in the story? And how does it resonate in the real world? Ooh. So there's a passage from the book.
They entered the room that smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, and Eve locked the door. When she flipped on the switch, Mauricio appeared. For a moment, they stood at the door, stared around the dank room. It reminded Eve of some of the hotel rooms they lived in for brief periods when she was a child before moving into the family home. With a long sigh, she went to the bed and dropped down. "This is the renovated section," Eve muttered. "At least it's only a day or so," said Mauricio, kicking off his shoes at the door. She removed her backpack and went to the bed. After opening the pack and looking inside, she poured the contents of the bag onto the bed. She stared in awe at the stacks of money, more money than she'd ever seen. So I read that little section because there's not a whole heck of a lot of discussion about Eve's, childhood poverty. It's really kind of mentioned in that section, and it's juxtaposed with all the money that she pours under the bed that she has now. Because despite the fact that this place reminds her of some of the motels that they stayed in growing up, she's obviously not going to be here permanently when we see her, laying the stacks of money on the bed and so forth. So it's also very interesting to think about her reaction to that hotel room versus the one that they stay in eventually later on in Philly, when she's talking about the lush pillows and the nice, I think jacuzzi bathtub, things like that. It's very posh over in Center City, Philly. And also thinking about it in relation to her house, her family home in Indiana. So there's a lot of messaging around home in the story that I didn't necessarily realize was there until we were at the near final stage in terms of revising it. But I'll let Lornett give his opinion about what he thinks in terms of the home thing.
Well, Eve is trying to find a home and just kind of be happy, and kind of going back to that poverty piece when we're introduced to the character. She's having money woes, and despite loving her job as a teacher, she has bills to pay. She has another home in Indiana that's probably going to be foreclosed on because she has a parent there that's not paying the bills and pulling their weight. So, and also kind of in our generation of millennials, we came of age during the Great Recession. So money and, becoming grown and possibly homeless was always on our minds. So this is kind of how that, even in this fictional story, we kind of connected to real life and, everyday problems that many, many people face, unfortunately, in this society. But I think it kind of makes the character more relatable, and we're not creating some character who doesn't seem realistic, even though the circumstances that she finds herself in and the abilities are obviously, beyond belief. But I think it's a fine balance.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's pretty clear how much her experience with poverty, even though, eventually in her childhood, they had a very stable, house, family home that her grandparents built. Even though everything kind of got stable in that respect, but the poverty and that she experienced never really leaves her mind. And she's still experiencing it, as Lornett said, even as an adult, working as a teacher, barely able to make rent and things like that. And it really influences her various decisions that she makes, sometimes very hasty decisions that she makes throughout the story. And that's just how reality, that's how it is in real life. a lot of times our experiences with trauma can be very traumatic, and all it takes is one image or thing to remind us of it, and it could color a decision that we decide, that we make, for better or for worse. And we see how that plays out with Eve, really throughout the story, even with the last page and the decisions she makes at the end of the story.
Yeah, and I just think the character, even with those circumstances, she's still like very proud, a prideful person, and kind of not wanting to be, helped out and trying to figure it out herself. Like, I can do it myself, and I don't need anybody help. But in the end, we all kind of need to rely on each other, and that's kind of what this story finds. So that's how she finds her home eventually in the story.
Yeah, eventually Eve realizes she has to have a support system around her, and she can't just rely on herself. Despite the fact that she spent her life relying on herself as an only child and all these things. And again, I would say that, traumatic experiences with poverty does have a tendency to, make people feel like they just have to pull themselves up and figure out how to rely on themselves because everything else is flimsy. But this is our universe that we got to create, and everything doesn't have to be so flimsy for Eve. She can actually win, and have a support system and not have to be always, scraping at the bottom and whatnot, trying to make it.
Yeah, and I think kind of what makes it relatable in real life is kind of one of the most famous comic book characters and fictional characters created is Spider-Man. And despite being like a superhero, he's kind of like a nerdy high school kid who lives with his aunt. His uncles died, and they're kind of struggling to make ends meet. He's trying to, get grades, go to class, try not to, get picked on, and get the girl eventually, while working for the Daily Bugle, but also being a superhero. So it kind of makes people see like, oh, this is, this could be a kid in my neighborhood. This probably is me. So
despite the fact that, he's a spider guy.
A Spider-Man. But it makes them relatable. So we weren't thinking about Eve as like Spider-Man or anything like that. But it's kind of just making your characters very relatable to, the average reader, and being like, okay, can I root for this person? Can I root against this person? But at the end of the day, we hope that you read Eve and want to root for her and see her win, because we want to see her win too. But you got to read the story to find out what happens.
Yes, good pitch there.
Yeah,
and also, the last thing I'll say is that it's also about creating a character where readers can understand the decisions that the character makes. Like those decisions make sense because a person can see themselves making those decisions in the same circumstances. So even when you're writing fantasies, trying to embed it in reality a little bit is just really, really crucial. And sometimes a fine line to walk, because how much can a spider guy or someone who is invisible, how real can it be? But nonetheless, that's what the imagination is for.
Yeah, so that imagination.
So with that said, this concludes our third episode of B.Y.O.B, discussion of Eve and the Faders, the first book in the Faders and Alpha series. You can find out more information about the book, about what's coming next in the Faders and Alpha series, and so forth at BernetaHaynes.com, or you can just Google Eve and the Faders and you'll find lots of information too. Thank you for joining us.
And as always, cheers.